Hello, everyone. Thank you for expressing interest in Tri-County Regional Center's new disaster preparedness program known as RESCUE Tri-Counties. RESCUE is an acronym that stands for Readiness, Education, Safety, Collaboration, and Understanding in Emergencies. My name is Matthew Wilkins, and I am the Emergency Response Coordinator for TCRC and the creator of this program. This program is geared towards those we serve, their families, caregivers, and the vendor community. This version of the program is geared towards caregivers and vendors who provide direct services to those served by TCRC. The information contained is the same in all versions, however, some of the language has been modified to reflect the target audience, and the core information remains largely unchanged. This brief introductory presentation will go over what the program aims to accomplish, what emergency management is, which is the basis of this program, the phases of emergency management and how they relate to this program, and an overview of the training you will receive by completing this program. With that said, let us begin. There are three main components to this program. The first component is the on-demand and live training, which you're viewing now, which consists of 12 core curriculum courses following this introductory presentation. My goal is that every month add a new topic, and they will be housed within one of the four phases of emergency management, which we'll go over in a little bit. There's also being proposed a few informational brochures, one on general disaster preparedness and one on the Rescue Tri-Counties program. As of this recording, there is no estimated date on which they will be available as they are still going through the design and approval process. You may have already seen the RESCUE Bulletin, which is our quarterly newsletter. It is the external facing newsletter that mirrors the internal newsletter, which contains articles that are written by myself, that are locally geared towards things going on within the Tri-Counties Regional Center catchment area. And it also talks about some of the things I do as the Emergency Response Coordinator, which is the ERC acronym. And lastly, there'll be an ability to schedule a meeting with the Emergency Response Coordinator and myself for assistance with planning. In addition, I've also established a few program goals that I hope to accomplish with the disaster preparedness program I've created. The main goal being to increase the disaster preparedness and response knowledge of the service provider community that assists those served by TCRC. I also want to ensure that caregivers in the vendor community have the knowledge, skills, and abilities to create a personal emergency plan for their clients. I'll also be creating a library of resources and on-demand training such as this that caregivers and service providers can use to enhance the independence and self-advocacy for those in their care. And one of the last goals I've established is to provide the caregiver and vendor community access to information about programs for those that they care that they may qualify for that are additional to what TCRC can provide during times of disaster. In this case, it would be resources that offer things that we are not able to. So as I mentioned earlier, this program is based on the field of emergency management. So what is emergency management? Emergency management is an all hazards approach to preparing for and responding to disasters. So what does all hazards mean? An all hazards approach focuses on building the critical capacities and capabilities needed to prepare for a wide range of emergencies, whether human caused or natural. It is also the managerial function that creates the framework within which communities reduce vulnerability to hazards and cope with disasters. This is the definition from the Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA, which is why it sounds so dry, of emergency management. There are four key phases: mitigation, which is risk reduction; preparedness, which is planning and training; response, which is the immediate actions; and recovery, which are short and long-term in nature. These are the four phases for which our program is built upon. As you will see, the lessons are categorized into one of these four phases. It's also the partnership between federal, state, and local governments, private organizations, and volunteer groups. Emergency management is focused on the guiding principle of a whole community approach, which means that it involves people in the development of national preparedness documents and that it ensures their roles and responsibilities are reflected in the content of those materials. Lastly, it is a continuous cycle of planning and action undertaken by emergency management professionals. So once the cycle ends, it begins again, aiming to constantly improve the resiliency and capacity of a community to recover from a disaster. Now let's briefly go over each phase of emergency management and what it means in a little more detail. The first phase is the mitigation phase, which is defined as the capabilities necessary to reduce loss of life and property by lessening the impacts of disaster. This phase is made up of the actions that we can do before a disaster is known to reduce the impact on the community, or rather, in an attempt to. This includes things like insurance, floodplain protection, and public outreach. The second phase is the preparedness phase, which is the continuous cycle of planning, organizing, training, equipping, exercising, evaluating, and taking corrective action in an effort to ensure effective coordination during incident response. These activities and actions are taken before disaster. This phase is fairly self-explanatory and includes evacuation planning and building emergency supplies like food and water. The third phase is the response phase, which is the capabilities necessary to save lives, protect property and the environment, and meet basic human needs after an incident has occurred. These actions take place during an emergency. They are actions taken to further protect lives and property and include actions like seeking shelter, turning off utilities following an earthquake, and the most visible portion is the first responder action, such as those performed by police officers and firefighters. And this brings us to the final phase, the recovery phase, which is the long-term activities beyond the initial crisis period and emergency response phase of disaster operations that focus on returning all systems in the community to a normal status or to reconstitute these systems to a new condition that is less vulnerable. These activities and actions are taken after a disaster. This phase is meant to return a community to better than it was before and to ensure that the resources and services available prior to the disaster remain in place. For example, you would not rebuild a building exactly the same way it was before, because if you did this and the same disaster strikes again, then you can expect the same results. In this example, you're also mitigating against future disasters. This is why the mitigation phase can sometimes occur simultaneously with the recovery phase. Other actions in this phase include financial aid and assistance to help pay for repairs. So with the 4 phases now covered, let's talk about the lessons that make up Rescue Tri-Counties, and you will see how they fit into the definitions provided for the phase in which they are based. In the mitigation series of trainings, we cover home assessments, which is going through the home and looking for hazards, assistive and adaptive technology, which is the equipment and technology that can help those we serve during the times of disaster, and then disaster-related insurance, which talks about the benefits of having specific hazard-related insurance. So in this version of the series, these topics will be presented in a way that you, the caregiver or service provider, can apply it in your capacity to the person you care for. Most of these are going to be geared towards how you can assist them in completing these activities. Depending on the person you care for, you may only need to do a little bit of the work, or you may need to do all of the work, but you need to do it with them. This is not a one-size-fits-all approach, but rather the knowledge, skills, and abilities necessary to properly plan for disasters. In the preparedness series of trainings, we cover personal emergency plan. So we'll teach you how to create an emergency plan for the person you serve, taking into consideration their specific needs. The making of a go kit, how to create and stock a kit or a shelter in place bag for the person you serve. And evacuation preparedness and transportation, which is about planning for evacuations and includes some portions of self-advocacy. In the response series of trainings, we cover communication during emergencies, which is planning how to communicate during times of disaster with responders and support networks, sheltering in place or evacuating, training to give you the information to make the decision whether you should consider evacuation or sheltering in place, and emotional support and coping strategies, which is techniques for dealing with stress during emergencies, as well as guidance regarding mental health resources and crisis counseling following a disaster. In the final series of trainings, the recovery series, we cover accessing support services and resources, which just contains tips on how to navigate resources available to disaster victims outside of TCRC. Disability-specific recovery concerns, which is navigating the recovery phase, taking in consideration the specific needs of those with disabilities, and peer support and community resilience, which is focused on the guidance on establishing a peer support network and creating support groups after a disaster. One of the final products of this program is the external facing newsletter that is geared towards those we serve, their families, and their caregivers. This publication is aptly titled The RESCUE Bulletin. This publication is written in plain English to increase accessibility to all and to make translation easier. As of the second issue, that's also available in Spanish. This publication shares common themes and topics with our internal facing newsletter as well. It is sent out via email, posted on social media, and will be available on our website in the section dedicated to the Rescue Tri-Counties program. This is the time where you could ask questions if this was being presented in person. However, since you're watching a recording, please send any questions you have to the TCRC Emergency Response Coordinator below. That contact information can be found on our website as well. In the meantime, I will pause for a few moments so you can copy down this information. And with that said, we've reached the end of this introductory presentation. I hope that you found this informative and that you will continue on and go through the full training. In the meantime, I wanted to thank you so much for your time and your commitment to safety and disaster preparedness for those that we serve.